Anyway, so the spectrum of child abuse covers a number of forms that the child abuse takes, that is, neglect of children, which we will not be covering, though it is one of the commonest forms of abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse. Then you have this phenomenon of child labor, outlawed in most civilized countries, but still very much prevalent. You can see even down here in Zion, when you go past any of the Kelas, you see little boys and girls sometimes engaged in child labor. Nobody reports them. And there are some very telling stories about the need for child labor and the evils of child labor. Then there was Munchausen syndrome by proxy. It was a form of child abuse recognized relatively recently. It was only, I think, around 1989 or 90 that this came to light. And this was because of a pediatrician called Roy Meadows. And Meadows observed that in his ward there were cases who had apparent physical illnesses for which there was no basis. We would not call them somatizers really, because what was happening over here was illness was being invented almost always by the mother. We've had one such case, if we have time to discuss it. It's a very interesting case and a very tragic case at another level that I'd like to talk about, if we have the time towards the end of this presentation, which is fairly long by itself. You stand warned. Now, percentage of child abuse and neglect victims by type, you'll be shocked that I'm quoting a 2000 paper over here. Suffice it to say that I have the updated data as well. Unfortunately, I couldn't put it on the slide because of some copyright reasons. But the pattern remains the same. Neglect is by far the commonest form of abuse across the world, and the great developed country of the United States is no exception at all to that. Then you have physical abuse. There are other forms of abuse that is a little vague category. We'll discuss that later if we have the time. Then sexual abuse and psychological maltreatment. When I start speaking about psychological maltreatment, I will of course be coming to emotional abuse, which is a synonym. And it's important to note that emotional abuse almost always accompanies all other forms of abuse. Or it becomes emotional abuse at some level, even if the person perpetrating the abuse is not wanting to disturb the person's emotions. Munchausen by proxy is a classical case. The mother does not want to hurt the child. The mother has very good intentions towards the child. But she keeps going from place to place, saying this child has hemorrhage, or this child has a headache, or this child has worms, for which there is absolutely no physical evidence whatsoever. Now, child abuse in India. Who's that very vociferous minister we had? Renuka Chaudhary. You remember her? So during her tenure as Women and Child Welfare Minister, she, for the first time, commissioned a survey on child abuse across the country. This is a phenomenon that had epidemiologically never been studied in this country. And what her team came up with was quite astounding. The first national study of child abuse, covering 13 states and a sample of 12,500 children, aged between 5 and 18 years, is released by the Ministry of Women and Child Development in 2007, and it said that 53% of children face some kind of abuse. That is not an astounding number when you compare it with figures across the globe, but it is astounding that in this country, for this population, we had paid absolutely no attention to the phenomenon at all. And that is really astounding. But the data is a little confusing. If you look at this chart over here, you look at the breakup, the slides are not very clear somehow. When I said them, I thought they were, but can you read them clearly? What do you find a little odd over here? So again, you have physical abuse. They defined it as severe sexual abuse for some reason. I don't know what severe and not so severe, how they make the distinction. And emotional abuse. Suffice it that it is sufficient for me that they at least recognize these three forms of abuse. What do you find strange about this? You see the incidence of physical abuse, that's the thing for you. If you look at the percentage of young children, percentage of children between 13 and 14, and adolescents defined as 15 to 18 years, All of them, the figures are less than 68. Yet the national average is 68. I don't know how we can come up with such figures. So our statistical data don't swallow stuff that is fed to you in the form of tables just like that, even from the government of India. That's the basic lesson. But I believe this was a well-meant survey, and I still have not got a reply to how come this figure emerged. Now we see that physical abuse is quite common. Severe sexual abuse is also pretty common. Emotional abuse has a slightly lower figure, but we need to take into consideration, and I'm going to go on emphasizing this, that emotional abuse is almost always an accompaniment of other forms of abuse. This is the crime against children. Total crimes short of 95,000. And you have protection of children from sexual offences act. The POCSO that Dr. Sagar referred to earlier. You have rape, you have assault on a girl child. Listed as something different. So these divisions seem to me to be a little artificial. Murder is an extreme case, but unfortunately the figure is very low. You have kidnapping and abduction. Other crimes collectively put over there, and procuration of minor girls, IPC categories. That's right. But we have no mention anywhere of child abuse, because child abuse is the crime we ought to be speaking about, and many of them are covered under other headings. Now let's go on to see what the antecedent and causative factors are in the case of child abuse. That's the first Tuesday. I titled my presentation from Tuesday to Tuesday because Tuesday comes before Wednesday. Wednesday's children I like to think are the abused children. Not a phenomenon that we like, of course, but there we are. So the first Tuesday is the antecedent factors, and the next Tuesday is what happens till we come to the next Wednesday. Those are the consequences of child abuse. And the antecedent factors, first we consider them at a social and cultural level. Upbringing styles. Now, we have a notion from not so distant past about sparing the rod and spoiling the child. Spare the rod and spoil the child is a common paradigm. So if you want good children, give them good beatings, otherwise they never look to turn about that. This is largely reduced, especially let's say in urban India, but it is nowhere near gone. Just now I'm dealing with a scientist who gave me his autobiography, that's my style of functioning in therapy, that I get them to write out their life story in many instances. This person, I mean, it was appalling to know that his father, a government servant in the department of, one of the government departments of mining in this case, and the mother who was a school teacher, both sat down and discussed what is the best way to punish this child. Is a stick better than a whip? That's the kind of discussion that went on. This person is about 22, 23 years old now, working in mining. And he gives me his autobiography where this was going on right up to the time he was 12 or 13. In which case he developed sufficient physical strength to hold his mother's hand and say, you can't do this to me anymore. This story must have also attended on many cases that you see that a child will not take physical abuse anymore and stops the parent from engaging. You have spare the rod and spoil the child in English. Marathi, we have the saying, "Kadi baze cham cham vidya yehi kamikam." This is a standard paradigm in so many households that especially for academic achievement, there has to be harshness. Without harshness, nothing is going to occur. And across cultures, you will find this happening. The worst example that I've come across in my study of cultural norms of child rearing and child abuse is in Sparta. In Sparta, what they used to do is a male child would be taken out of the settlement once he's past the toddler stage, kept outside, roughly a distance of half a mile away, among rocks. There was no other hazard around but among rocks. The child was familiarized with the track in one or two exposures. After that, the child was left there. The mothers were locked up because the mothers would scream. The Matru Vatsalya would tell, and the mothers would not allow this to, did not want to allow this to happen. But the laws were that this is the way to decide. If the child manages to come back to the village or the settlement, the child is part of it. And this is, mind you, past the toddler stage, so we are reckoning between 9 and 16 months of age. If the child comes back only then the child is fit enough to be. We know, we say Spartan in two senses. One is that their needs are very frugal and they are able to survive on a minimum of resources. He says Spartan also in the sense of great agility and physical resilience. So there we have this worst example of how, to my mind, child abuse used to take place. So across cultures, people have generally thought of harshness as a means of deciding who is fit and how to get people to be fit. Norms regarding punishment. Those two proverbs in English and Marathi that I shared with you and I'm going on emphasizing are clear norms of how to punish a child. And also, across cultures, while child abuse was equally common, the socio-economic status also determined what kind of punishment somebody would be subject to. So, the poorer the section of society, the harsher the treatment tended to be. This was also because poorer sections of society were aspirational. They wanted to rise above, and so they wanted tougher kids. So they wanted survivors. So they wanted to push them a little harder than in the more privileged segments of society. We'll come now to antecedent factors that pertain to the parent. Almost always the father, but sometimes the mother as well. The parents' personalities. And over here, we're looking at their ability to tolerate frustration as a very important thing. Parents whose frustration tolerance is very low tend to be perpetrators of abuse much more commonly than others. Over here, we might think of antisocial personality disorder, paranoid personality disorder as two extreme examples of parents who tend to be abusers of their children. But it doesn't have to be that they fulfill the criteria for those two personality disorders, I should say. It could just be that they have a poor frustration tolerance, a poor control over their temper, and a need to express their aggression. And across all of biology, the stronger always takes advantage of the weaker. The parent is always stronger than the child. And they find this a very convenient outlet for their aggression. The parents' own upbringing. One thing we find with child abuse is that patterns of abuse tend to repeat in families across generations. So, a parent who has been an abuser will bring up a child. We know a number of mechanisms are likely to be operating over here. The nobody has convincingly proven this with robust research. It's an epiphenomenon, so to say, that we notice this. A mother who is an abuser is likely to have her mother or father who is an abuser, whose mother or father would again be an abuser. And it tends to run in families. A parent who has psychiatric illness, particularly chronic depression, chronic paranoid tendencies, including paranoid illness, paranoid personality, is much more likely to engage in abuse. And here, the abuse is sometimes very tragic because the path to heaven, they say, is paved with good intentions. Path to hell is paved with good intentions, and they mean very well, but they tend to engage in abuse in a manner when they think they are being protective to the child, they lose it and they perpetrate the abuse. Also, parents who have had to face frustration themselves because of chronic physical illness, or they've ended up as a result of an accident or some other mishap in their lives with a physical disability, then that sense of frustration spills over in the form of poor frustration tolerance and thereby child abuse. Some parents who have been very, very healthy parents in terms of their attitude to the child, in terms of their upbringing practices, because of too many life events coming together, they are stressed out, and that stress can spill over into abuse. I've seen this in quite a few cases. Also, do parents have any notion of child abuse that they engage in child abuse? Me, Baba, I'm a parent, so I'll do whatever I want. This is very often the attitude. And you also have this very common notion. The mother usually transfers the disciplining to the father, and the father is supposed to come home and take charge, which might involve whacking as well. Now this is a common pattern again across cultures, and they do not think of it as abuse. They think this is normal practice. To this day, this kind of pattern prevails, and Sometimes there's a conspiracy. I was mentioning to you the case of the scientist. Here again, the mother, after the son was strong enough to push her off, passed on the disciplining entirely to the father. As it is, it was partly passed on. Now it was entirely passed on to the father. So the child, the scientist had to wait till he was 16 when he could overpower the father. And say, no, you're not going to use wield your stick on me, because I can hold you now and I can stop it. He also had the presence of mind. He's a scientist with a very high IQ, I would guess. And I would go to the police. And the father raised such a hue and cry in the family circles. Do you know what my son is doing? My son is threatening me with police action. The backstory, of course, is not told that I wanted to whack the child and beg him for a way to the police. So our awareness of what is child abuse also determines whether we are going to be abusers or not. Antecedent factors for the child. I think I can't get a better example from at least mythology. I'm not going to pretend that, like the Prime Minister said, that we had plastic surgery years ago. We also had childhood abuse years ago. So, what are the kind of child factors that we know that we do not speak of personality with especially younger children, we speak of temperamental traits. Too much variation in emotionality in a child, which is often a forebear of other psychopathology in later life, can determine whether the child is likely to contribute to the parent's sense of frustration. Mind you, the parental factors always override the child factors. So if you have a healthy attitude and if you have a notion of wanting to engage in healthy parenting, the chances are you will not perpetrate abuse no matter what. But some children are more likely to be provocative, and everyone's threshold for tolerating frustration varies. So if somebody's threshold is rather low, but the child is well behaved, abuse may not occur. On the other hand, if the threshold is very low and the child's behavior and child's temperament is such that he is likely to cause disruption in the family circles, then the abuse is more likely to occur. Then you have certain psychopathologies. ADHD and AMDD are typical patterns of behavior that become very difficult for parents to tolerate. I did a small questionnaire with ADHD, parents of ADHD, and overwhelmingly it was the mothers, because they are at home most of the time, the other ones looking after the child, who had whacked the children at least 3/4 of the time because of the ADHD behavior. And that is a minor form of abuse. In most cases it didn't go on to severe abuse. But there you are. These are kids who frustrate parents much more than others. Also a child's physical health. Sometimes the child is laid up because of unforeseen circumstances, sometimes because of severe childhood illnesses, and sometimes because of disabilities. And if those things happen, then it becomes more and more frustrating for the parent, especially a parent who has a full-time job as a parent, who does not get any scope for respite. That starts telling on them, and they engage in abuse. The abuse that happens in such circumstances is seldom really physical abuse. It tends to be emotional abuse, and it tends to be a tendency to engage in neglect. I'm at my detriment, I can't do anything more. I'm just going to sign off from this responsibility of looking after this child for at least a few days. Thereby the child starts suffering. So physical demands made by the child, quite commonly on account of the physical health, but sometimes on account of the child's activity, the child's engaging in extracurricular activity. That can also be a indicator of child abuse. Let's look at the abuser. Who is the abuser most common? Anyone wants to offer an answer before coffee runs out and beyond start? Who is most commonly the abuser? Put up your hand, it will be easier. Absolutely. The father is most commonly the abuser. Who's next? Something quite close to father? Tahu and Chacha. Stepfather. Stepfathers are not as common as fathers, such as society is, but stepfathers are very commonly the abusers. But fathers outnumber stepfathers. Let's take it to it. Elders in the family. A parent, a step parent, We have the classical paradigm of the stepmother, so well depicted in so much of our media and literature. That actually is based in reality. It's not completely imaginary. It's rare to find a stepmother, or for that matter, a stepfather, who's taken very well to the child. But I must say the pattern is changing. What it was when I started with child psychiatry way back in 1982. Today things are much better. Step parents are much more accommodating, much more affectionate, and much more psychologically sensitive, at least in metropolitan India. Then you have siblings. Tragically, you have grandparents, and grandparents can engage in very macabre forms of abuse. Uncle, aunts, others. So elders in the family is a common thing. Other authority figures, we did mention teachers, not to disappoint you, teachers are also among the greatest perpetrators of abuse. Coaches, especially coaches of extracurricular activities like sports. We'll see a small case we get from the US in that context a little later. And sometimes neighbors and other friends of the family with whom the family has good contact and a good sense of trust. The child also gets into this situation of trusting this individual before it is found that that person perpetrates abuse. Peers. And this is another of my favorite topics, bullying and the consequences of bullying. People of their own age engaging in child abuse. Now today, for want of time, I'm completely leaving out bullying, but it would not be fair not to mention it in the context of who the abusers are. And if we have time, we'll discuss bullying in some detail later. Often, there is a great sense of frustration on the part of the abuser, usually not directly related to the child's behavior. There's nothing the child has done to deserve any kind of castigation or punishment. But it's the frustrated adult who, in a moment of weakness, engages in the abuse. Then you have extreme forms. The abuser can be a pervert. Some individuals have what we call a sadistic temperament. They may not fulfill the criteria for race killing, which is our next category, but they just have a need to see others in pain. They do not have any other criminal behavior. You do get such individuals who engage in abuse, sometimes within the family, and that's most tragic. But you can get sadistic people waiting to take their temper, not temper necessarily, but their pathological need for seeing suffering in others, and very often the child is the victim. And of course, if you have an ASPD, that is a sitting duck, the child is a sitting duck when an ASPD person is there in the family. And persons who have deprivations in their lives, most importantly, we'll be referring to this a little later, sexual deprivation. An adult who is sexually deprived needs sexual fulfillment. There is a Dubai young person available, and then the sexual abuse ensues upon that. Other deprivations, such as deprived of a family, somebody comes into a family, household, getting a place in that family, that deprivation, he suddenly wants to overcompensate for what he has been deprived of for a long time. These are affectional needs, not only sexual. And these people can also engage in abuse. Sometimes there's a displaced anger, there's a displaced motive for revenge for what so life has not given me, let me get out of this family, and that takes the form of abuse. Move on to physical abuse. When I was an intern, by the way, I should mention that I almost became an intern in this hospital in 1979 when I just finished my medicine and I came here. My mother was very keen, she was in Pune and she was very keen that I should do my internship in Maharashtra. And through some connection we were directed to Dr. Bapat, who used to be a nephrologist, I think, a neurologist. Harsha Bhogle's mama is his name. But I came here, everything was done and then they told me that they would be giving me a stipend. And I could not survive without some money, so I went back to my Book Street and did my internship. Anyway, that was an aside. When I was doing my internship, one of the cases I had to do was esophageal dilatation for a tiny baby. And what happened to this baby, the father was always extremely anxious, clinging to the baby, holding him. Father very often smelled of, I would say reeked of, but just smelled of alcohol. This father belonged to the Sonar, the Goldsmith community. And because this baby used to weep too much in the night, he could not tolerate the weeping. You know that goldsmiths deal a lot with acids. He had fed acid to this child, and the entire esophageal lining was burnt. Then there was a stricture of the esophagus, and he had to use esophageal dilators. The child never physically developed normally, but the father was extremely remorseful and wanting to make up. I remember that. I followed them up for about 4 years after I finished my internship, but since then I had lost contact. The child grew up to be mildly mentally retarded, which is why, again, I was in the picture. And so this can have long-lasting, far-reaching results. We must remember this guy, Professor C. Henry Kemp. Henry Kemp was one of those people who escaped the Holocaust and came to America. Being a German, I think German, maybe Austrian, Jew by extraction, he was very sensitive to cruelty in general. And in the early 60s, Henry Kemp was the first guy who really documented something called the battered baby syndrome. And the battered baby syndrome is a classic in psychiatry which you should be aware of. The battered baby syndrome was chillingly illustrated with X-ray images of children's multiple fractures. The bones tell a story. The child is too young or too frightened to tell. That's a statement from that seminal paper. Dr. Silverman was a radiologist, and what is called the Kemp syndrome is sometimes called the Silverman syndrome, we shall see very shortly. But before these people had really documented the battered baby syndrome, there had been a radiologist earlier called Dr. Caffey. And Dr. Caffey had already seen fractures in children that were very difficult to explain in terms of the stories given by the adults bringing the child to them. So we then began to call it the Caffey-Kemp syndrome. Non-accidental injury. How do we suspect it? Most often perpetrated as a punishment. Human violence can take myriad forms. Slapping, strapping with belts, and I have seen this also occurring, making a child lie on his back. The father says, okay, right for the punishment. Takes out some belt and lashes the belt across the child's back. We have seen injuries of this kind. Feeding of noxious substances, like the goldsmith I mentioned a little while ago. Burns with irons and cigarette butts. We have had people with abdomen studded with about 70, 80 cigarette butt burns. Cuts, bruises, lynching, all these, a word that has become very commonplace now. All these are forms of physical abuse that we have encountered and which are well recorded. The commonest sites of this kind of abuse tend to be the visible part of the body. So the arms, the face, and this was part of our lives. I was asked to recite the Bhagavad Gita. My grandmother insisted I should learn it, and I would not learn it. I just was. Yes, don't shlok partner is having the dark day. Now that was a kind of threat that we were doing. A hot kitchen implement would be put on your cheek or on your hand. It never happened. There was only a threat, and the threat worked. I must say that. But that's a kind of, again, going back to our notions of punishment. That's considered a very effective form of punishment. Sometimes it's just a one-off occurrence. Please remember that if somebody has happened to have whacked the child badly, don't immediately castigate this person as a devilish person and take him to task. Certainly reprimand them. Teach him better styles of functioning, better styles of disciplining and parenting, but don't overdo it. This slide ought to have come earlier, sorry. Forgive my French. Auguste Ambroise Tardieu syndrome. This guy Tardieu is believed by the French and a large number of Franco-Italian people to be the father of forensic psychiatry. And he documented submucosal edema and submucosal hemorrhage across the different parts of the body in the, I think, 17th century. And he suspected that there was child abuse. But somehow, in other parts of the world, this is not adequately recognized. The French, like we speak of Caffey-Kemp syndrome, tend to think of Tardieu syndrome in that context. You already mentioned Dr. Caffey, the radiologist who documented there are unexplained injuries in children. Dr. Kemp later in life acknowledged that Dr. Caffey was really the pioneer. and insisted that it should not be called by his name, but it was called the Caffey syndrome. And later on, after Dr. Kent passed away, it came to be called the Caffey-Taylor syndrome. A man who did extensive research, again in the context of unexplained injuries, was the radiologist who worked in the same place as Dr. Kent, and it's also called the Silverman syndrome. When to suspect when the child is brought with an injury or physical complaints that are very genuine complaints, when do you suspect that there could be physical abuse actually? Stories that don't fit the evidence. Oh, he just rolled down the staircase and that's how this has happened. We know that rolling down the staircase won't cause certain types of fractures. At the most, you may get rib fractures, but limb fractures are very uncommon for a roll down the staircase. If a story keeps changing from time to time, then you know that there's something fishy happening, and you should suspect that there is abuse going on. Locations. If you have a certain, both eyes are injured because, and the story told is that something hit the eye. Nothing hits both eyes unless it is voluntarily done. So that's another clue for you. Parents who do not want to give a full story, very reluctant to give a story, and sometimes it's not a parent, it could be another caregiver. With all forms of abuse, including physical abuse, there is a conspiracy of silence, sometimes also involving others. Those are the non-abusers. The person who is not abused has come with the person who was abused to the casualty, and the story is given. Now, why is the non-abuser not putting together the story? A, the abuser may be a very powerful person. The abuser may not be necessarily physically powerful, but psychologically meaning. Is a story I've heard. So the mother says, don't tell them what I did. If you tell them, I'll perhaps commit suicide, I'll run away, that kind of thing. So there's a fear of the abuser. There is a stigma attached to the notion that this family has engaged in abuse. And there is the whole notion, so common in our country, of family and community prestige. All these prevent people from telling the full story. Here we move on to something which is my favorite, within my favorite topic, that is emotional abuse. Emotional abuse is very difficult to clearly define. It's also probably the most common form of abuse, as I alluded to earlier. Please forgive Kiran here, she's there as an actress, she's not somebody who is accusing of having engaged in abuse, but she's a perfect figure for an angry mother. This was something which a patient said to me. How could any mother say to her child, I wish you were dead, or I wish you were never born? And this kind of thing has a deep impact inside the brain, especially of a younger person. Below the age of 12 years, it has a huge impact. Shekhar Sheshadri from Nimhans, with his group, also found that he was studying suicide, the precedence of suicide, that these kind of remarks sometimes are so deeply imprinted. The person A might start believing that he really should not have been born, that the family will be better off without him. And he sometimes engages at a later stage in the development history in suicidal behavior. The other thing that happens is revenge. Acha, I didn't want to be born. You think it's better off if I was dead? I'll shoot you. I'll kill myself. Both these mechanisms operate in bringing about suicide, especially in young people. Emotional child abuse is any attitude, behavior, or failure to act that interferes with the child's mental health or social development. It can range from a simple verbal insult, or from which I think every person sometimes suffers, to an extreme form of punishment, and many a times becomes chronic. Emotional abuse is almost always present when another form of abuse is found, which I have already said and I will keep saying. Surprisingly, emotional abuse can have more long-lasting negative psychiatric effects than mere physical abuse or mere sexual abuse, which hardly ever occur anyway, especially if this emotional abuse has been chronic. So if you've been called an ass once, or even a non-parliamentary abuse once, it's not likely to have that big an effect. But if you're repeatedly told the same thing, then it has an impact much more. Other names of emotional abuse are, you'll find this in the literature, verbal abuse, mental abuse, psychological maltreatment or psychological abuse. Emotional abuse can take the form of a parent who refuses to recognize the child anymore because he has kind of signed off. This happens in families that have a lot of pathology in them, especially if the father has a psychiatric illness that becomes too frustrating for him to tolerate. But ignoring a mischievous child, ignoring a child who has the father feels, or the mother feels, or both of them feel that we no longer want to have anything to do with this kid. Khana hoga, nahi hoga. Kabhi khana bhi nahi hoga. Then an actual overt rejection, isolating the child repeatedly, exploiting and corrupting the child. Parents withdraw from disciplining partially or altogether. Terrorizing the child, which happens quite commonly, and leads to long-term sequelae much more commonly. Then verbally assaulting. What do we mean by verbal assault? Repeatedly scolding the child, make taunting remarks, actually use abuse, where you get other signs of the, what do you call this? Your keyboard. Abuses that cannot be mentioned for being parliamentary over here, that kind of abuse. Repeatedly called foul names. At a minimum, let's say donkey, ass, idiot, these kind of words, but sometimes extremely horrible words. Sarcastic remarks. Oh, Lord Sahab abhi aaye. Abhi 7 baj gaye. The watch is very 9 o'clock. That kind of repeated sarcasm. Damaging statements. तू तो कभी नहीं सुधरेगा, तू तो मेरी जान लेने के लिए पैदा हुआ है. These kind of remarks impinge on the child, impact the child's brain much more than we seem to have realized. And of course, many of these statements are about the child's worthiness. The child starts imbibing this notion of his or her being unworthy, or start believing that I will never get better anyway. While the definition of emotional abuse is very complex, and also, because all of us engage in it to some extent, it's imprecise, professionals agree that for most parents, occasional negative attitudes or actions are not necessarily considered emotional abuse. Even the best of parents have occasions when they have momentarily lost control and said hurtful things to their children, failed to give them the attention they wanted, or I should say needed, or unintentionally scared them by their actions. This action could be, again going back, ignoring, rejecting, also the range of actions. It doesn't always have to be a fiery face of Lalita Pawai. This movie, Udan, 2010 movie by Vikramaditya Bhotwani, is a very, very good movie in terms of how it depicts abuse. An intelligent technocrat in the factory at Jamshedpur, because he has a very poor temper control, drives his wife to suicide. There's a child from that marriage. That child grows up in fear of his father. The other thing that happens is this person remarries, and the second wife also dies under mysterious circumstances, leaving a child behind. And both these two boys are subject to intense physical and emotional abuse, repeatedly by this father. The father has now turned an alcoholic, which he was not in the beginning. And then he will not allow these children to have their way with anything in life. The elder boy is bright. He is being driven to take up some technical course which he is not at all interested in. He has a talent for writing. He wants to be a writer. He wants to be a poet actually. And his poetry is completely crushed, or the attempt is made to crush it. Any of you seen this movie? That is the best paradigm I have seen of child abuse anywhere. Brilliantly acted. If you haven't seen it, please see it. And somewhere along the line, the older boy notices that the younger boy is also being subjected to abuse. And you have the classical case of them being taken to the hospital, and a different story is told about how the younger child sustained injuries. Cover-up story by the father. And then the elder boy manages to garner the strength to go away from it all and takes the younger boy along with him. That's why the flight, you die. There's another syndrome that was described, which researchers have debunked, called the parental alienation syndrome. Richard Gardner, an American child psychiatrist, coined this term. And this is in the case of parents who don't get along, and finally parents have to separate. When parents separate, there's a custody battle almost always. Very seldom is there an amicable terms of visitation and so forth, which both parents agree to. And in such a circumstance, one parent gets custody of the child. Almost always in this country, the younger children is the mother. Sometimes the father. the father or the mother, whoever takes possession of the child, so poisons the child against the other parent that the child is completely alienated from him. The tragedy is, in the 4 instances that I have seen which I am documenting currently, always the mother has got the custody of the child was extremely attached to the father, and the mother was very jealous of the fact that the father was a closer parent. Now the mother will not allow the child to have access to the other parent as far as possible until the law intervenes and forces it. And the law on its own doesn't do anything. The father has to go and complain to the court. Then the court sends an inspector, and then the child is allowed to visit the father. This has led even to suicide on the father's part in one instance. That I'm aware of. Again, a scientist family, a scientist physiotherapist family. The mother was a very efficient physiotherapist, a very well-known scientist, but the child, now a doctor, was separated from the father in a painful manner. Now, Richard Gardner dealt with this phenomenon over and over again and came with extreme solutions that I don't want to discuss just now. But suffice it to say that this syndrome does exist, buttressed, though it is not yet buttressed by adequate research. Whether the child is exploited as a laborer or as a prostitute, drafted as a young teenager into armed forces, which happens so often in the places where there is a need for hostile interaction. It used to be in Southeast Asia in the beginning, and now we know it's largely in the Middle East. Young people are drafted into armed forces much before they have even formed their psychologically matured personality. Forced as young adults into a lonely life as domestic workers, deprived of an education to work on the family farm or denied adequate nutrition or health care. Children need help and protection from an adult world that perpetrates this emotional abuse. Here we move on to sexual abuse, to which we have grown more sensitive over the last 2 decades. There are 2 well-defined forms. People very often think of sexual abuse as something very violent. The girl is caught, she is raped. That does happen, but that's not a commonest form. The seductive form is much more common, where a girl is taken aside and said, "Hello, you're a sweet girl. Why don't you come and sit on my lap?" The girl innocently does that. And then what ensues is what turns out to be a tragedy. Mind you, from the seductive to the violent, they transit quite commonly. Starts with seduction, goes on to violence, especially if the person has recognized the abuse and wants to do something about it. These can overlap or transition from one another. From after the violence, sometimes the perpetrator says, "I'm so sorry I did that to you, but I really like you. I shouldn't have done that to you." And then bribes the child with goodies. We'll see that in a film in a little while. Mention of a film. The perpetrator is often a close family member. Here, the stepfather is the most common culprit. There can be a father, an uncle, or an older brother as well. The conspiracy of silence is most insidious in this kind of abuse. The next few slides are borrowed from a social worker from the Baltimore Child Abuse Center, very recent slides. They are based in the US, but they are very true for us. The awareness of child abuse exploded in the 1980s. Suffice it to say, the first technical literature on commonality of the commonness of child sexual abuse was by whom? A name you are all familiar with. Just take a guess, you're likely to get it. Papa? Kaushik has said it. Right. His first paper on the analysis of hysteria, he believed that hysteria was largely because of suppressed memories from early child abuse. As his cohort of cases increased, he found that this is not entirely true, and he retracted his statement. One great thing about Freud, no matter how much we choose to debunk him, especially your generation, started with mine. The fact is that he had very sharp observation, and he was fairly honest in reporting his observations. But in the US, this exploded into awareness in the 1980s, and we of course follow the US in most matters. And there was a 322% increase in reports, which is a massive increase by any standards. But the credibility of these reports started being questioned. Complaints of false allegations and brainwashing then came up. And nationwide agencies developed methods and protocols for investigating child sexual abuse allegations. Quite commonly, because the alleged abuser was in a powerful position. Not uncommonly, people in government, people in respectable professions like ours, people in the legal profession, defense services officers, and so forth. And these people refuse to believe that such respectable citizens could engage in this kind of abuse. Child sexual abuse is a unique crime with unique behaviors and dynamics. Rarely third-party witnesses or medical evidence avails. Only 4 to 5% of children who give a credible history of sexual abuse have a specific finding on the medical examination. This is to be understood because the younger tissues, on the whole, heal much faster. So by the time the abuse is being reported, by the time the investigation takes place, the healing very commonly has occurred. More than 90% of all children who give a history of sexual abuse have a normal or non-specific medical exam. So the medical exam is important, but the absence of any definite evidence in the medical exam should not rule it out. Denials of the extent of the child sexual abuse. Now, this kind of extreme perversion, it's not easy to admit that you have it. So you had, many of you may have seen the movie Spotlight. It's dealt with the cover-up for Canadian priests, Catholic priests who were there. The Roman Catholic Church decided to go into denial mode on a collective basis. To say that priests cannot engage in this. Nuns cannot engage in this to a lesser extent, but priests cannot engage in this. In our own country, you have a number of godmen who have clearly engaged in sexual abuse, but because it's religion and religion gets equated with superiority, and therefore it is not legal. Why blame these people? I made my first presentation as a young psychiatrist at the South Zone Conference in Salem, and I had a very well-known senior child psychiatrist from Chennai sitting there as my chair. And she said, Dr. Bhide has made a wonderful presentation about child abuse, and what did he say? Sexual abuse, sexual abuse. But of course, all this applies to the West, it does not occur in our country. I had just dealt with 2 cases of sexual abuse and I was very angry and wanting to bring it to light, which is why I was invited to make that presentation. But that's the attitude within this country. Child psychiatrist from Chennai who just brushed it aside saying that this is not the experience of our country. Then you have perpetrator stereotypes, we'll look at it in a minute. Minimizations or exaggerations of the extent of the harm that the child sexual abuse brings about to the child's life, and diffusions of perpetrator blame. How common is it? 1 in 4 girls, 1 in 6 to 7 boys in America, they say, are likely to be subject to abuse. There's an elevated risk for smaller children and for children with disabilities, which we mentioned a little while ago while speaking about child factors in the antecedents. 300,000 cases were reported in the US. These are only the reported cases, we don't know how many remain unreported. Only 10% of children report their abuse. There are myths associated with it. It only happens in the poor, uneducated communities. We know this is not true. It is equally rampant in the affluent segments of society. Inconsistent and scarce findings that race or socioeconomic status are at risk, unlike physical abuse, which tends to occur in lower socioeconomic strata, definitely more commonly. Then there is a myth that there is a greatest risk from strangers, what the Americans call stranger danger. And the media tends to focus on this. And I was told when I went to the US first time about 35 years ago, I saw a kid in a pram, and I just felt like picking up the child. I did not know about the gender of the child. And I was told, hey, take it easy. In India, we would have done it. I know how many times my kids' cheeks have been plucked like this by strangers because they were attractive kids, that's it. Nothing else. And you want to just be friendly with the child. But that is no. But usually, perpetrators of child sexual abuse are not strangers. All CSA perpetrators are male. That's another myth that prevails, but it's not without some basis. And there are dirty, perverted men who go about this. Many of them in day-to-day life will not come across as dirty or perverted. Men who sexually abuse boys are all homosexual. Not entirely true. 70 to 90% of alleged abusers are people known to the child, whom the child trusts. 90% of alleged offenders are male. However, there are documented cases of female perpetrators. Child sexual abuse, alleged offenders tend to be married, employed, and heterosexual, even if they seem to take interest in boys. Child sexual abuse accommodation syndrome is something that was documented. It is not supported adequately by research, but Dr. Samit came up with certain facets that are very important to us. There is secrecy involved, there is helplessness, there is entrapment and accommodation, there is a delayed and unconvincing disclosure, and finally there could be a retraction and recantation. Secrecy happens when the child is alone with the abuser. It should be with his or her abuser. So there is a quietness, there is very commonly a sweetness. This is our secret. Don't tell anybody else. Don't tell anyone or else. There will be serious consequences. The other thing is, if you tell anybody, nobody is going to believe you. So the child is made to feel helpless even if originally the child is not feeling helpless. This becomes both the source of fear and also the promise of safety. This secret is safe between us. Just keep it between us. That's the kind of. The helplessness comes because of an authoritarian relationship. No child has equal power to say no to an elder or to anticipate what the consequences are going to be of A, the abuse, and B, the revelation. The expectation for a child to cry out and run away, which is what many mothers say, why didn't you just scream and run away? No child will do that, because while we have the fight and flight response, what happens in this case is very often the fight is replaced by freeze. They just get frozen in that of the physical intimacy. It's difficult for cohorts and law enforcement agents to understand this, and disbelief and rejection by non-offending caregiver becomes self-blame, self-hate, and guilt for following the acts further. Very commonly, you will have mothers who will tell the child, you must have dressed provocative. You must have said something. You must have gone too close to the subject. That's why this happened. Entrapment and accommodation. Abuse is not usually a one-time occurrence when it's sexual abuse. Multiple incidents occur. They are accompanied by grooming acts. And the sexual demands go on escalating over a period of time. The child, faced with continued helpless victimization, must learn to somehow achieve a sense of power and control. The child prepares for the sexual act before it happens, undresses and places themselves in position for their perpetrator, and this becomes a stimulus for more and more abuse. The child initiates the sexual act under tutoring, I should add. How children experience abuse usually happens under the disguise of love or attention at bath time, bedtime, cuddling together in front of the TV. Abusers use these and physical contact opportunities to sexually touch children. So, in India, out of 350 college students investigated or interviewed by a enhanced team between the ages of 17 and 21, 83% have experienced physical eve teasing. 47% were molested, or they have experienced sexual overtures, almost always by males. 15% of them were less than 10 when it first occurred. Another Indian study, 1 out of every 7 girls has experienced serious forms of sexual abuse, including rape, of which 31% were less than 10 years of age. So the younger the child, the greater the risk. That's the basic truth. Then you have a tendency to romanticize child sexual abuse. Many of you may have heard of this novel called Lolita, which became an extremely successful movie as well. It's based on a skeleton of a true story about how a young man is obsessed with what he calls an infant, a young child who is living in a single-parent family now, and he falls in love with her. He manipulates it such that he marries the mother, who is desperate for a partner in life. He's otherwise a normal, healthy American female. But he manages to get rid of her, and then they drive across much of the United States, going from place to place while he sexually abuses her, and she gets more and more entangled in a relationship that is obviously not going to be rewarding. Everybody dies like the Mahabharata in this. Then you have the book by Pinky Virani, herself a victim of child sexual abuse. I urge those of you who are inclined towards child psychiatry to read this very, very well compiled book. It is a treatise, I might say, on child sexual abuse. Bitter Chocolate, it's called. She is basically a journalist and an activist. My non-favorite topic, the Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act, which is something we should be familiar with. I remember Kaushik and I were attending a session in Pune for the Child and Adolescent Psychiatry conference that was happening over there. The POCSO is clearly a case of good intentions gone too far. We are now expected to report every case of sexual abuse that you come across. If you don't, you are culpable. You can face up to 6 months in prison. I don't know whether I'm foolhardy or brave in saying this. I have not reported a single case, though I come across cases of child sexual abuse every so often, mainly because of my interest in psychiatry and interest in psychiatry. I don't think we should be. What ought to have been done is to say that the mental health authority must be contacted by such a person. And if the mental health authority chooses not to reveal the details, it's all right. But they want to compile data following the government study, which was very well intentioned. But now they want us to report every case you are expected to. I must say that I have met some workers who operate under the POCSO in Karnataka, and they are very well trained, extremely well trained to be not to make the child feel threatened, or if the child does feel threatened over a period of time, how to work out that threat perception. So to that extent, it's quite a good measure, but I still feel very uncomfortable. When the child has opened up once and talked about it, to force them to go to a law enforcing agency, I find it ridiculous. In another movie, Highway, Alia Bhatt has performed very well in this movie, and at the end, the very end, she reveals how she has anger against an uncle, family friend, I think, who's very, very dear and respected by the whole family, who had been seducing her repeatedly with imported chocolates. And she was fond of them, and she became fond of the uncle, until she realized this is not all right. But the lesson to take from there is, please remember that we have devastating crime like this, like child sexual abuse. But is it really? I go back on that, devastating. The sequelae of child abuse, let me come to that. What is sequelae? The long-term sequelae. What is this? Immediate sequelae. There is emotional disturbance. Naturally, the child is, and now we're not talking about sexual abuse alone. We're combining the whole lot and talking. I have to do that for want of time. Emotional disturbances are very naturally the immediate consequence where the child becomes either sad or tearful, tense or anxious, cranky or irritable. You have these three cardinal patterns, but they can overlap. A child who is sad and tearful can suddenly become cranky and irritable as well. And you get an admixture in several cases. Almost invariably, there is a drop in scholastic performance that can even go on to avoiding going to school, school phobia, running away from school. Very commonly and rightly, we think of conduct disorders and externalizing disorders when we think of truancy. But sometimes truancy occurs on the background of a school avoidance, on the background of child abuse that has been there. Dissociative symptoms. Many of you may have read this book by Sanders called The Case of Lucy Bending. It's a classic novel about how a small child develops symptoms that we would call hysterical or dissociative, that really have their root in abuse from within the community. Then the child becomes clingy because of the abuse. Some adult who seems protective or likely not to allow the abuse to go on, a child clinging to the mother again and again because the father has been engaged in physical abuse is something we have seen quite common. Or a child, a slightly older child, will become very aggressive, hostile, to engage in oppositional behavior. The long-term sequelae can be highly varying. Anxiety disorders, affective disorders. We have increasing evidence that personality disorders, particularly borderline personality disorders, can ensue upon repeated abuse of an emotional kind, sometimes compounded by sexual abuse. Impulse control disorders, especially impulse control disorders pertaining to sexuality, are well known to be sequelae of child abuse. Then, standard thing which man does, drowns his sorrows. So, these people are much more prone to engage later, to settle scores, so to say, by engaging in substance abuse. In the long term also, attitudes to sexuality can change. A sexually abused person, especially if the abuse has been perpetrated against the person's wishes, which is most commonly the case, can become cold, rigid, or impotent. But the other thing can also happen. The child now gets enticed to the sensual pleasure of sexuality and can become promiscuous. There was, at a time, especially in the late 70s, a tendency to believe that homosexuality and sexual orientation disturbances, as they call them, occur because of seduction. And that is indeed true for a substantial minority of cases. And gender orientation can change because the first sexual experience has been a seductive one with a lot of pleasure from a person of the same gender. That can be a forerunner of a different gender orientation. People who have been subject to abuse repeatedly can become people who are anxious, cynical, paranoid in life. The attitude towards the opposite gender can change very radically. If a mother has been perpetrating abuse repeatedly, I've seen many sons who hate their mothers and are misogynists. They do not want ever to have anything to do with the woman. Sometimes they get into a marriage and take out all their anger against women, against their new spouse. Their spouse, actually. New spouse because of a particular case that's rankling in my mind. Also, the attitude to children and their upbringing, like we said, it tends to run in families. Abusive parents tend to get children who will grow up to be abusers. And if there has been a lot of abuse, we find that suicide and attempted suicide in small paper which we presented, much more likely to engage in attempted suicide cohort of between 19 and 25 years of age, if they are engaged in, if they've been subjected to abuse repeatedly, much more likely to engage in this behavior than people who have not suffered abuse, who are very rare anyway. Also, while we did not deal with neglect as a phenomenon of, as one of the types of abuse, physical problems, failure to thrive. Many of you may have come across this lady called Nadine Bliss. No, not the South African journalist. Nadine Harris. Nadine Harris is the Surgeon General of California. She has recently come up with a book called The Deepest Well. And in The Deepest Well, she is basically a pediatrician. And she has studied adverse childhood experience, ACE she calls it. They call it. She was dealing with a child who, the best of circumstances, was just not growing. And then when she went into the history, she found that the emotional abuse of a very rampant kind by different people, including foster caregivers. And that's how the child suddenly had not suddenly, over a period of time, had failed to gain weight, failed to have a proper stature. Mentally, he was slightly below normal. And the history was because of multiple ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. But way back in 1964, a team of pediatricians led by Dr. Powell in the US studied what is called psychosocial dwarfism. Children who were given excellent nutrition, excellent living conditions in a Boston or juvenile home or abandoned children were compared with children who had had an absolutely normal family life, matched for age and weight. And these children who were given good nutrition and good living conditions just did not match the controls in terms of physical growth and mental growth. Why was that? And Powell coined the term psychosocial dwarfism. Astonishingly, nobody has thought of repeating this time. There were endocrine variables also which seem to explain the dwarfism in those cases. Eminem over here, really sorry Mama, didn't want to hurt you. Extreme bitterness that gets entrenched in the mind, difficult to get rid of. That can also be a symptom. Now, do you think Eminem is sublimating his crisis? At what level you could say yes, because it's taken an art form. It's a very angry art form, if I may say so. Or is it a reaction formation? The important thing about defense mechanisms is when you think of one, it doesn't necessarily rule out another. To my mind, it is both. It is sublimation and it is reaction formation. He's a very, very bitter man for many years, but I believe he's very different now. His fans tell me. But all the news about sequelae of child abuse isn't bad. People who suffered sexual abuse, I alluded to this a little while ago, quite a few of them can go on to have very normal sexual orientation also, very normal interest in sexuality, very willing to settle down to a normal life. About 1/3 of them who have suffered sexual abuse, in the long run, do settle down very nicely. And that is also from the Baltimore group that I used the slides from a little while ago. Now, miscellaneous considerations, what can be done? Intervention with the child, intervention with the perpetrator, intervention with other caregivers and family, and then follow-up. And there's this notion of resilience. Also, I have had to face this question, and I have to face this in my own life, not only in presentations. By being so sensitive about every form of abuse, are we going to bring up a generation of namby-pamby people? Absolutely no strength at all. We have a naval officer over here who will tell you what a tough regimen they have to go through to become the toughies that they are. And thank God for that, otherwise where would we be? So that has been a major consideration. Suffice it to say that you don't have to go through abuse to know what abuse can do. So anecdotal narrations can help a lot. Okay? So we're not going to bring up a generation of namby-pambies. These are the things that can happen. This is what you need to face. This is what you need to be prepared to face without actually having to face it. So rehearsal is good enough strategy, in my opinion, to make up for what braveness or resilience or strength would have come from having faced abuse. Find balance between urgency and patience when you're dealing with the child. We know that play and art can help to elicit the hystery. We have to deal with a number of emotions in the child. First, there is anger, there is anxiety, and both of these can be admixed. Please remember that. Also, because the child has been subject to being put down in some sense, there is sadness. Very commonly, children start feeling, मैंने ही कुछ किया था, तभी पापा ने मुझे इतना। It's not papa's fault. This is very common with physical abuse. It is quite common with sexual abuse. Unfortunate, but there it is. Part of our task is to get the child with this guilt complex inside him, exonerate and say, "Beta, aapki galti nahi thi." And it takes a long time. It's not as easy as this one sentence that I read. That sentence is a summary of what needs to be done over a long period of time with the child. Then the reassurance that life can go on in spite of this abuse. This is not the end of your life. We now know that there are biological effects of child abuse, some of which are long-lasting. I haven't had the time to go into that, and biological psychiatry is not my area of intense interest. It must all be biological psychiatrists, I say in a different context. Then ensuring safety, sometimes even drastic measures like removing the child from the family for a short period of time, or making sure that the perpetrator is kept away for a long period of time, which may sometimes be devastating for the child. And then, if you've done this, you have to be the one that guides the child to go on. With the perpetrator, we'll go quickly because that's not our area of interest mainly. Most perpetrators are in denial, but don't take a highly moral standard because you'll lose them completely. Certainly not at the start. They have done something horrible. They need to face the consequences of having recognized that they've done something horrible. But there are dangers in castigation. There are n number of people who helplessly have committed suicide because they've been discovered to be sexual abusers. That's not what we, as far as possible, want. Any time I've had psychiatry students tell me, that's what he deserves, sir. Good thing he committed suicide. I don't think we can afford to take that kind of stance, certainly not at my age, maybe at your age. If and when denial persists, more severe means may be adopted to stymie the evil of child abuse. And there, we might take legal help. We have a duty to report other forms of sexual abuse, but not for other forms of abuse. A few who gain insight and want to change, it has been shown, can be helped by social skills training. Then you have the family, always in the Indian context, dealing with emotional upheavals, cynicism, that's the kind of thing which we have to battle. Clear objective of protecting the child is something we must always keep in our mind, uppermost in our mind. Fostering the child's healthy development after the trauma is something that we need the family's help for, and therefore this is important. Again, while we are guiding the child to move on, we need to help the family also to say, okay, this horrible thing happened, now can we look at something else, can we go ahead in life? Another movie, This Boy's Life, Leonardo DiCaprio's one early successful movie. Please try and see this one as well, where a child has inner strength to battle resilience. A horribly abusive parent, well played by Robert De Niro. He's a stepfather over here, and this boy is determined to do well academically, including forging grade sheets and so forth. But he manages, with the help of a bright student friend of his, to get out of the clutches of this abuse that is going on. Now, some of us are born tough. CM Tyres used to have the motto, born tough. Some of us are made tough. Is it possible to build up resilience if this is already built in? Studies seem to suggest that in vulnerable years, especially between 5 and 15, resilience is best built up. The best example of this is the Israeli kibbutz, where children go away for long-term camps. And over there, there is a lot of psychological element which we haven't recognized adequately, the good it does. You, again, like I was saying earlier, through narration you face situations, through role-playing you face situations, and you learn not to be broken down. Now, is resilience a guarantee against further personal problems? Sometimes when you overdo resilience, you become proud of the strength. That can be a dangerous sign, because then you can become a perpetrator of some form of violence yourself. A word of caution. This person, Chanel Miller, she was known as Emily Cole. She was an athlete, and she was abused by a fellow male athlete. And it was a horrible form of repeated abuse. And the case came to light after she made a police complaint, but as is usual, her anonymity was preserved. She was 22 years old, so it really doesn't apply to child abuse, but it applies definitely to sexual abuse. And then she said, what's the point in my concealing my name? I want to talk about myself. But she revealed her name, and she's written this book called Know My Name. I haven't read the book, I've only read about it. The cover art for this book was inspired by kintsugi. Like, if I forgive my friend, please forgive my Japanese, I don't know the right pronunciation, which is a Japanese art form of preparing broken pottery with powdered gold. The idea is that you don't deny the abuse. Let it be well known. Let it be something that others will learn from. Not merely paper it over and cover it up, which is what we tend to do. You can have a difference of opinion about this particular thing. I think sometimes it's best to cover it up, provided enough psychological resolution has taken place. In follow-up, please be gentle. If somebody has not reported back, you might call up to find out why they haven't reported. It's worth it, because otherwise some other circuit starts where abuse is again being perpetrated. So be persuasive, but persuasive within limits, not threatening the person's privacy. My favorite quotation, they never miss, when I have anything to do with child psychiatry and parenting. Children begin by adoring their parents. As they grow older, they judge them. Rarely do they forgive them. But what is the relevance of this? We come to it in a little while. Awareness and prevention of child sexual abuse is something very important. We know that now we have models where we teach young children. It's a very tragic thing that you have good touch and bad touch. At a very young age, they're sensitized to this, but I think in the kind of world we live, that is inevitable. The blue ribbon was adopted as a symbol of awareness of child sexual abuse about 25 years ago, and there are lots of campaigns with that blue ribbon. This being skipped, suffice it to say, a huge amount of money ends up being spent because child abuse is such a rampant thing and it's not always recognized. Dangers of underreporting, like Professor from Chennai, myths about our culture being ideal and free of child abuse, lack of sensitivity to the issue of child abuse, because we had that chart over there where abuse wasn't even mentioned. Dangers of over-reporting. When sexual abuse, especially anal sex abuse, became quite well known in the West, in the UK, I think this was in the mid-90s, there was a pediatrician who was doing the anal reflex testing, and he reported that 60% of the children who had abdominal complaints had been sexually abused. Now, the anal reflex, of the tendency of the anus to does not always contract, it can sometimes dilate. It does not necessarily mean there has been penetration. But that was the feeling at that time. And this guy went on to report horrific figures of sodomy in his cohort. And he had to finally be threatened with being delisted. He is a good pediatrician otherwise, but this is the kind of thing that can happen when you start over-reporting. In America, on the other hand, when sexual abuse became a widely recognized phenomenon, children, sometimes tutored, sometimes not, started inventing stories of sexual abuse. You have had even phenomena of guys committing suicide because they were accused as parents or caregivers of having engaged in sexual abuse. Because everybody was looking for, abhi milna chahiye, nahi mil raha hai, to bachcha will report evidence. Invented memories. This is a great danger. I'd like to conclude with a poem that I wrote when I had just started my post-graduation and was dealing with cases of child abuse. Puzzle, they call me. Some say it can never be solved. To me, I am a mystery too that I beg you to please resolve. My tears have dried, my passion is spent. Perhaps it's all my fault. This is something that occurs again and again and again. I've been saying it. Perhaps it's all my fault. Lifelong will I repent. Don't look at me strangely, please. Even if you can't put me at ease, I am a jigsaw that once was a picture. All the pieces are here again. There's always one missing, or one that doesn't fit. The story of child abuse is a story of horrific misery. But if we are sufficiently sensitive to it, first as our profession, and then as a society, and finally I hope as a country, I think we're going to go a long way in becoming a mentally healthier lot. Thank you very much for your patience listening. We're going to take a long time.